my friends. This is chapter 6 in our textbook on understanding and implementing the 16 firefighter life safety initiatives. Long title for this book. Chapter 6 is on risk management on the emergency scene. Um, we could talk about risk management in other areas. This focuses specifically on what happens on the emergency scene. And as you can see, I'm looking at page 91. It covers a variety of initiatives, initiative 1, 3, 4, and 12. So when we talk about risk management, and especially when we talk about it on the scene of an emergency, it kind of looks at the acceptable limits, the acceptable parameters of what firefighters can and cannot do as far as risky behavior. And I think we hear that term a lot. I hear firefighters say, oh, it's what we do. We risk our lives every day. But when we look at risk in a more technical or a more, I can't come up with the word right now, but in a different perspective than simply what we do, what is the risk and how can we eliminate that risk? Your book uses terms such as often, once in a while, never, frequently, to describe the risk or how often, the frequency of the risk. But what is the result of the risk and how serious is that? So when we look at Life Safety Initiative number 3, which focuses on integration of risk management with incident management, including strategic, tactical, and planning responsibilities. And that's what it kind of focuses on. And risk management is a term that it's kind of a relatively new term. We hear it all the time. And you hear it in private industry, you hear it in public government. It's all about risk management. And a lot of times that's what your if you have an internal type of prevention division, say in an industry, it's referred to as the risk management division because that's what they're trying to do is manage the risks through whether it's through a task analysis or whether it's through functional analysis, those kinds of things. Here in the fire service, we have different types of risk management parameters or controls, if you will, such as administrative, and these are your standard operating procedures, training requirements, safety practices, rules and regulations, fire code compliance, industry standards, and best practices, and having knowledge of what those best practices are. There's also engineering controls to go along with those. So what we can't regulate through rules or regulations, and we sometimes know that those are only as good as the paper they're written on. How we design our apparatus, how we design our buildings. Building construction is a type of engineering control. Some of our technology that we have. Think about the thermal imaging cameras and how we kind of borrowed that from the military as well as from law enforcement and how we've been able to adapt it for our use. And also active and passive fire protection devices. Apparatus design. What happens when you don't wear your seatbelt? The fact that today seatbelts are this bright orange in most apparatus and ambulances now, so you could tell if somebody's wearing it or not. If you want to go back a long time ago, open cab trucks. We've done away with that. Everyone rides inside. No one, back in the olden days, before I was a firefighter, people were riding on the tailboard, and that's how the term tailboard firefighter came to be. We don't do that anymore. We learned the errors of our ways about that. And then, of course, there's personal protections to go along with engineering and administrative. This is our PPE, making sure that we wear it. We have to do that part. Chemical protection, clothing, rescue gear, tools, and of course, our SCBA that we have. A lot of times we are thrust into situations where there's a high risk and a low probability. And I know in other classes, you will hear or have heard Gordon Graham, and he does an excellent presentation about high risk, low probability high probability, low risk, and how we need to train for the different aspects there. Of course, our fireground leaders need to know what's acceptable and what's not. And certainly firefighters need to be able to understand the risks that are inherent in their environment and how these administrative, engineering, and personal protection controls affect that risk, and have confidence in the department that they've been put in place and that they are the best that can be to protect that firefighter. So risk management is a big part of what we do. There are safety standards, there's risk managers. Some of those safety standards, NFPA 1500 is one of those. That's one of the first, as a matter of fact. I'm trying to see if it has a date here. Was issued in 1987. The 1992 edition required a formal risk management plan that made sure that it put together these policies and procedures, that it excuse me, addressed all fire department activities and included risk identification, evaluation, management, and risk control. So today there's more there's more safety standards. There's NFPA 1521, the standard for the fire department safety officer. There's a standard on health-related fitness programs, and there's even others that have come out now. So those standards are in place to help us with our risk management and how we can help to meet the initiatives that meet that initiative number 3, where we are integrating risk management into our emergency ground operations. So life safety initiative number 1, we've talked about it a lot. It is the one about culture. I think that you could probably apply this to every aspect of what we do in the fire service on a 24-hour day. There's so much. Creating a culture of safety is what we need to do, both individually and collectively and organizationally. I think we talked about this in the last chapter. We've heard this saying, risk a lot to save a lot, risk a little to save a little, risk nothing to save nothing. And as I speak today on this, just yesterday, 2 firefighters were killed in York, Pennsylvania, and when a wall fell on them. I don't know, there's not a whole lot out about the details yet. Just know that the fire started the day before and that these people were putting out hot spots. It was an old building. Don't know, I'm not going to armchair quarterback, but they were risking a lot by standing under that wall. It trapped 4 firefighters. 2 have passed away and 2 of them have non-life-threatening injuries. So think about that. We want to make sure that we look at this. When we think about, or when we talk about risking a lot to save a lot, that's a life, and it has to be a viable life. And that's where it really gets tough to try to make those choices of risking your life for someone. If we know that someone has been inside for 20 minutes or more, we're probably not saving a life, and we're risking our own to do that. And so you have to make choices, and that's to me is the hardest choice to make. Risk a little to save property, and think about what we're doing. Are we saving a chimney, or are we saving property? Are we saving exposures? Unacceptable risk include trying to save worthless property, where there's no lives at stake. Don't risk your life for that. Making sure that we are properly dressed and protected with the proper staffing when we are saving this property. And then, of course, risking nothing to save nothing. If we know a building's vacant, there's no reason. Alan Brunacini from Phoenix Fire Department has a quote in your book. It's on page 96. If 4 hours into an event, a building that is 3/4 of the way burned, falls on top of you. That's not aggressive firefighting. That's being in the wrong place at the wrong time with a lack of supervision. And I think it pretty much lays it out right there. Kind of sad when we think about how often that happens. The IAFC, the International Association of Fire Chiefs, developed 10 rules for engagement for structural firefighting. Those are on page 97 in your book. Make sure you look at those. The acceptability of the risk and the risk assessment. No building or property is worth the life of a firefighter. That is number 10. Number 5 is firefighters shall not be committed to interior offensive firefighting operations in abandoned or derelict buildings. So, check those out, if you will, to make sure that we're all on the same page as far as risk management. When we look at integrating risk management, and this is what the, if we go back to the initiative, number 3, including strategic, tactical, and planning. And so we want to look at those areas of ways that we can integrate risk management into that. A good incident commander recognizes that the safety of firefighters is at the same level as the safety of the people in the community. So everybody's equal, and a good IC will recognize that and use that as an operational decision-making tool, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Making sure that everyone does go home after that call. So there has to be some strategy. If there is not enough resources on scene, call for more. Don't wait. Go ahead and get them en route, which is better than having someone hurt or injured, or even worse. Don't be afraid. Don't be ashamed to back out. There's no shame in that. And we have to realize that as a service. At the tactical level, it's often been said that the first 5 minutes dictates what you're going to do for the next 5 hours. I have heard that often during my career. So when we're making these decisions, the tactical decisions that have to be made, going offensive, going defensive, making entry, how much information do we have? How much, where is the fire located? How much fire is there? And where are the people, mind you, that we are going inside for? Where can we find those people? That's information that we need to get. Of course, each of us must assume responsibility for our own on-scene safety. Remember your own safety concerns. That's one of the most important things. And a lot of times firefighters they just don't. That's their heart. And I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but there's got to be a balanced and well thought out decision-making process that goes into that. When we talk about planning as integrating this into in this risk management function into our planning, some of this may be addressed during fireground safety. It may be addressed during pre-planning of a particular building. I can remember one building where I used to work. It was an old bank building in a downtown area, or right on the square. It was about 3 stories, 4 stories tall, and they had pre-planned that building. It was empty, and then it was a furniture store. And when it was a furniture store, it caught on fire, and no one died. And that one came awful close, but because of it was brick, it was not true brick all the way. It was because of the type of construction that it was. So making sure that we are looking at these things and knowing as much as we can about what we are going into helps with the planning process. Life safety initiative number 4, when we think about that on the fire ground or the emergency scene, number 4 says all firefighters must be empowered to stop unsafe practices. This has to be so true. Speak up. Many incident commanders, they don't have eyes everywhere. They depend on your eyes. So when you see something dangerous or hazardous, speak up, say something. Because if you don't, and somebody gets hurt, you're going to feel pretty bad. You're going to feel pretty bad. Fire scene safety is similar to risk management. Both are risk management systems. But when we think about our fire scene safety, we should be looking at our SOPs. We should be looking at our culture, our leadership, all of that, how it works together. We want to make sure that we are thinking about cultural change and how we can bring together the mindset to make this happen. And it's all about values. When we talk about our organizational culture, we want to make sure that we have a greater understanding of staffing, the correct staffing, and training resources management and personal responsibility. Again, speaking up. We want to make sure too that each of our firefighters is, when we think about this, that there's a preparedness and training is a factor as well. Train as if your life depends on it, because it does, is another one of those catchphrases that has come about in the fire service. It's the key to safe fireground operations. You never slack at training. Train, 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 and train as if it's real. That is very, very important. Training leads to safer performance on the fire ground, which in turn leads to fewer injuries. When we train consistently, we don't have to think about wearing our helmet or wearing our turnout gear or when not to encroach upon a hazardous environment. It comes natural when we've trained, because our body is trained for that. Of course, training is only as good as the program, the curriculum, and the instructors. If you don't have if you don't have a good program to deliver, then it's not going to be effective. Certainly, if the curriculum's lacking or it's out of date, if we're not teaching to relevant issues, that it's not doing its job. It's training just for the sake of training, and that's not what we need. Training must be done at all levels of the department, from the recruit all the way up. A lot of times, more seasoned firefighters, you get tired of having a SCBA training every year. But you know what? It works. So you got to do it. You have to be willing to listen and think about, too, the leadership aspect of it. As that seasoned officer or employee, you're setting the example for those that have less experience. And again, it's a culture thing. It's a culture thing. Making sure that you have drills. You can do those on your own. You don't have to have formal training to do those. You may have to have some form of approval, but you can have your own drills in the station. There's nothing saying it has to always be conducted by the training division. You do want to make sure you have that formal training, making sure that you take advantage of all formal training that you can get, whether it's at your department, whether it's at the Georgia Public Safety Training Center or the National Fire Academy. The National Fire Academy provides a lot of more formal education than training, but it also creates a lot of value. So, the courses or a college degree like you are earning now can only help you as you create that culture of safety within your department. There's several more things within the text on page 104. It talks about equipment, tools, and personal protective equipment, incident response operations, standard operating procedures. All of that has to do with life safety initiative number. Let me make sure I get the number right. I think it's the one on number 4 about empowerment. So when you have this knowledge, when you are using these things properly, call somebody out that's not. Say, hey, buddy, put on your helmet. I have seen situations where, man, the gloves are hanging on their coat and they're doing vehicle extrication without them. Or maybe it's a training environment. Let me put it that way. Like, you know, they work a lot better if you put them on. So feel free. And I'm being a little sarcastic. Of course, you want to make sure that you say it in the light that it needs to be said, but still, feel free to speak up. Life Safety Initiative number 12, as it talks to this, it's response about violent incidents. And we're hearing a lot about this. The whole active shooter situations, we hear it a lot with EMS. We now have SWAT medics in some departments where these medics are trained and they back up the SWAT team. They're there to help out that team. So you got to have some protocols for these violent incidents, and we need to encourage that to happen. The same thing's true with hazmat. You know, we don't jump right out into hazmat situations. We've learned to stage and to make use of our resources. We need to probably do a little bit more of that in the firefighting side of things. On page 108 in your book, there is rules of engagement for responding to acts of violence or terrorism. I'm looking to see, I don't know if these are still, I think that these are IAFC, International Association of Fire Chiefs, been developed by them. If you don't know, don't go. Some of these things they sound so common sense when you say them, but you know, firefighters and the rush of the moment, they just jump right in there and they want to go. Also, think about, too, when we're talking about violence or terrorism, think about internal, you know, do you, there could be behavioral issues amongst the people that you work with. There may be, and whether this is caused by stress, PTSD, or whatever, those are also incidents that we need to think about as well. Again, if you learn that someone's having a difficulty, there's a lot of focus today about firefighter suicide, and don't ignore it. Don't ignore it. So, firefighters must be empowered to stop unsafe practices both on scene and off the scene. They've got to be empowered to prevent these accidents. And I think that's one of the biggest things that can create that culture that we're looking at, especially on the emergency scene. You have to be trained to recognize what's safe and what's not. Sometimes we may not, we're checking for hot spots next to this brick wall. I hope, like I say, I don't want to armchair quarterback, but maybe somebody should have recognized that. I don't know. I would hope that now we will learn something from that. You got to have the proper equipment, and not only do you have to have the proper equipment, you have to use it and use it properly. Again, we're pretty good at skating by on some of those things, but all of that is going to help reduce the number of firefighter deaths and injuries on the emergency scene. As I said, as I'm making this, 2 firefighters died in York, Pennsylvania yesterday. 1 firefighter actually died in Brooklyn, New York, when he was he was on a hose line in the basement of this structure, a commercial structure, and got separated and died. So it happens all the time, and we've got to do something to prevent it. So again, I don't like to armchair quarterback. We'll know soon enough about incidents like this and what happens after investigations are done. But we just need to work harder to prevent them from happening. So if you have any questions, be sure to let me know. I'm not giving you an assignment other than to watch this video and read your textbook. It'll all be covered in your final exam. Thanks so much. Have a great day.